Welcome back. Extreme changes in weather and natural disasters like fires and floods are increasingly becoming more prevalent, which may be a result of climate change. Concerns surrounding climate change and severe weather remain a long-time concern for many environmental activists and researchers. Joining me to discuss these concerns is Vice President of Communications for Climate Central, Peter Girard. Peter, thank you so much for joining me.
Kibin, thank you for having me.
Now, can you first just talk about your organization, Climate Central?
Climate Central is an organization of researchers studying climate change and helping people communicate climate science.
Now, can you talk about the difference between weather versus climate? I feel like I've learned about it so many times, but it can be so confusing and a little overwhelming. So can you just talk about the difference between weather and climate?
One of my favorite explanations is that climate is our planet's personality and weather is its moods. Excuse me. So weather changes. It's erratic. It can be different from moment to moment. And studying weather, particularly statistically, can be really noisy. On the other hand, when you look at climate, which is this sort of broader lens, and you take a look at larger spans, trends over decades, a lot of that noise disappears and you can see clearer trends. And that's what we're seeing with climate change.
So I just to reiterate, like climate would be, let's say, it's always supposed to be cold during the winter time, right? That's the climate. But if it's like 70 degrees, that's just considered the weather.
Weather is always going to be erratic. There are always going to be weird exceptions in weather. Climate broadly is that background, those systems that shape weather. But again, weather inconsistent, climate generally more so.
Now, how is a change in weather a result of climate change?
The biggest change, of course, is that our planet is warming. And so we're experiencing these longer, hotter summers and shorter winters. There are a couple of other areas where we're seeing these effects directly that people may not know quite as well. One is precipitation. So a warmer atmosphere holds more water. Our atmosphere has warmed something like 2 degrees over the last century, most of that coming in the last few decades. That means that it can hold something in the neighborhood of 7% more water. That's available to come down as rain and snow. And when we're seeing events like the atmospheric rivers in California, like this rain that we're seeing on the east coast of Florida earlier this week, snow earlier this winter, the rains that we're seeing in the southeast, all of these are directly connected to climate change and that capacity to hold more moisture and release more of it as rain.
So I'm so glad that you brought that up because whenever discussing climate change, we often do think just hot and cold. We don't think about water or fires. So can you just expand on that a little bit more? I know you kind of briefly talked about flooding, but also, how is these like massive fires a result of climate change?
The East and the West Coast, and we're talking about the U.S., East and the West Coast have really different weather patterns. And particularly in the West, you're seeing an increase in what you think of as fire weather. The first cause for that is heat. It's simply hotter and drier. And so that means that the forest floors, the areas where you've got fuels accumulating are less moist. It's much easier for fires to sort of start and move through. You're also seeing windier conditions. And so those three in combination, higher temperatures, lower humidity, higher wind, are creating far more dangerous fire conditions. In the East, we don't see that in the same way or in the same patterns as we do in the summer, but we absolutely see some of those same trends in spring and fall. And we're seeing wildfires in the East just in the last week or so, driven by some of those same conditions.
Now, I'm curious to know, how do we see this play out in New York City? I think as a New Yorker, we're just so used to like every single type of like weather condition that is possibly out there. So how do we notice these changes in New York City?
There are a few that we're seeing really clearly. One is the potential for thunderstorms. So again, if you split the country in half, the eastern side of the country is seeing far more available energy to create thunderstorms. So the days when you've got conditions that are ripe for a thunderstorm are increasing. One of the places it's increased most is New York, and that's just over the last 40 years. Another area that you're seeing these changes in New York is coastal flooding. So not just flooding from rain, but flooding because you've got higher sea levels. And whenever we do get a nor'easter, a hurricane, or even just regular high tides, you're seeing areas all around us that are flooding far more frequently than they used to.
Now, what are we doing as a society that contributes to the issues of climate change?
We're polluting, right? That's the quickest explanation. We're releasing fossil fuels. We're burning coal and oil and gas for electricity. We're releasing methane through gas exploration, through landfills. We're releasing nitrous oxide through farming. And all of these, what we call greenhouse gases, are wrapping around the planet like a blanket on a hot day, trapping heat. And the more we add to that blanket, the hotter the surface of our planet is getting. And that's effectively the reason that we're seeing climate change. And until we stop thickening that blanket, the temperature will rise.
Now, I'm curious to know, I don't think it's an issue of like who to blame, but is it just the average, American who is contributing to this, or is this from larger companies?
Everybody can make a difference, but just as you say, the biggest differences, the biggest opportunities are at the highest levels. So corporations, industries, governments, those levels are where we've got the opportunity to make a difference fast.
Now, I want to add, this just came to my mind, like we have made, there have been some changes. For example, in New York City, now you have to, have reusable bags. And there have been like smaller things like just trying to encourage more people to get energy saving appliances. Do you think those things help? And if they do, are they a big enough help?
They absolutely help. Unquestionably, it helps. There is a tremendous amount of work to be done to reduce the emissions that are causing this blanket of greenhouse gases. And all of these are contributing to a solution that is in sight. So yes, what you're doing as an individual, it's absolutely making a difference. We've got an awful long way to go.
Now, speaking about how long we have to go, I've heard some stories that maybe that it sounds scary, but that it's too late to, maybe reverse some things. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Just like what it looks like from here on out?
There are impacts that are baked in. There are things that we can't correct, but it is never, ever too late to make a difference. The longer we delay the solution, the more people will suffer, the more expense that will incur. But at no point is there a point of no return where it doesn't matter anymore. It will always, every step we take to reduce emissions will always have an impact on the future.
So what can we do now, I guess, on a smaller scale, like maybe one individual, and what can be done on a larger scale as a group effort?
They're connected. And so you as an individual, the choices you make, as I said, do make a difference. So when you change your diet, when you reduce what goes into the landfill, when you reduce your reliance on fossil fuels, that makes a difference. The way as an individual you can really amplify your role is to talk about climate change, talk about it with your neighbors, with your friends, but also signal to the people you do business with, to the corporations, to the industries, to policymakers, to your government. Let them know that it is important to you to fight climate change. As I said, these are where the opportunities to have big impacts lie. And the best thing we can do is make sure that the people who need to hear from us know that it's a priority. The worst thing you can do is stay silent and wait for somebody else to save the world.
Now, you mentioned diet, which I thought was pretty interesting. Can you just elaborate on that?
Diet is one of the ways that you as an individual can make a difference, partly by doing things like reducing the amount of meat you eat, particularly beef. And these are personal choices. You as an individual aren't wrecking the world's future by eating a burger, but if you can reduce things like meat from your diet, if you can eat more locally, it absolutely does reduce your carbon footprint and plays a role.
Wow. Now, what is the Climate Matter program?
Climate Matters is a program that was created for journalists and meteorologists to help them talk about the connections between climate and weather, not just broadly, but in their local markets, in their local areas. So Climate Matters allows you as a meteorologist, for example, to see what those connections are with analysis, with graphics, with experts and data in any city in the United States. So for 250 or something cities, we can tell you on a weekly basis what the trends are locally, what the climate is doing to your weather, and we also talk about impacts outside of weather. So things like farming and gardening and pests, mosquito season. So we essentially help media tell the public about what climate change looks like in their backyards.
Now, what inspired the creation of the program?
Particularly meteorologists have a powerful role as communicators. For something like almost 100 million Americans, the only scientist that you encounter on a regular basis is likely to be a meteorologist. And so, because people trust scientists, they've got an opportunity to give people truthful science-based messages that they can believe and test for themselves. And by arming them with these, with these graphics and with these guides to help them communicate to audiences, we can inform people about what they can do about climate change in ways that virtually no one else could help us with.
Now, what are some ways that we can make conversations about climate change a little bit more easily digestible to those who find it difficult or maybe a little bit overwhelming? Because I know a lot of young people sometimes maybe don't watch the news or they're scrolling on social media. How can we make these conversations a little bit more appealing to younger audiences or people who are just very unaware?
One of the ways, it can be this intimidating scientific discussion, but the truth is you're seeing it right now in your backyard. Talking about the weather and the weather connection to climate is one of the ways that you can get people to recognize and talk about it. When you've got strings of summer days that are, hotter than you ever remember, some people think that they're not remembering it right. It must have been like this growing up. The truth is, it wasn't. What you're seeing is different. When you're seeing these rainstorms that are dropping 2 and 3 inches of rain routinely, when you're seeing a coastal flood covering the part of the beach that you don't remember getting flooded before, all of these are impacts of climate change. And of course, talking about the solutions is important too.
Right.
You know, these are meaningful ways that the world is actually improving. There is a lot of indication that we have reduced some of the worst prognoses of climate change, and global participation, communication, and cooperation is making a difference. So talking about things like getting your power from wind and solar instead of from coal, and reducing what goes into landfills. These are ways where your everyday behaviors and what you're seeing in the world around you connect to climate change.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us to have this discussion.
Kibin, thank you, and thank you for letting me talk about climate change.
Of course. We encourage you all to keep up with Climate Central's efforts by going to their website at www.climatecentral.org, or you can follow them on social media at Climate Central. Stay tuned, we have more open for you right after this.